Madness has come to an end for Texas A&M following its 87-55 win to second-seeded Houston tonight. They're already breaking down the court behind us. I'm Erin Patterson. Alongside me is Travis Brown. Travis, it was a tough game for A&M tonight.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter was this was a Houston team that was way more athletic than this A&M team. And that's no knock on A&M. I mean, A&M, their calling card, their bread and butter through most of the season in SEC play was being more athletic, more fit, more all up in your face and causing turnovers in those games. But just this was national championship caliber athleticism with Houston. And so, Bucky McMillan and his staff caught lightning in a bottle with bringing in 14 players out of the transfer portal to build this roster the fact they gelled so quickly, the fact that they were able to be at first place in the SEC at one point, make the NCAA tournament. But that only goes so far when you hit the March Madness. And today was the day where they met a team that was just more athletic than them.
Right, and we can touch on what A&M was able to do this season as far as getting to gel so quickly, like you mentioned. But first, let's talk about kind of where things started to go wrong for A&M in this game. I mean, it was less than 8 minutes to play in the first half, and Houston goes on a 21-4 run to end and go into halftime. Where did you see the shift of how Houston was kind of able to get that edge and go on?
Yeah, A&M, they hit some threes early. And we've talked about this on podcasts and everything before, especially with Buckyball. When you can hit a lot of threes, that cures a lot of ills. And they were able to hit some threes that made up for some of the turnovers and things like that. But, the tide really started to turn when I noticed when A&M was pressing, and it was either Rylan Griffin or Marcus Hill, both athletics, fast guys, were trying to kind of trap and press Emmanuel Sharp. They're one of the Houston's point guards. And he just took one step and turned on the afterburners and blew by. And that was as easy as the press break was. It's just him being faster. After that, they really couldn't establish that much of a press. And then on the other side, when Houston kind of settled into the game, that athleticism really showed on the defensive end and their ability to close out on shots. A&M got some dribble penetration and was able to pass the ball out, work inside out, and then around the outside of the perimeter like they like to do. But even when they got Houston into rotation and it seemed like a guy might have an open three, by the time he caught, set, and shot, there was already a hand in his face. That was one of the most impressive closeout performances I've ever seen in a defensive basketball team. That led to missed shots. Houston capitalized on the other end, and then by the time halftime came, it's pretty much already over.
Right, yeah. And I mean, I think that was something I texted you during maybe it was the first or second half because we were sitting across from each other. But I said when we were watching it, it was pretty clear just how good Houston's defense was. And that was something really lights out to just watch and see in person. But going off that.
And if you saw either of us like giggling on camera, it was because we were texting and giggling like middle school girls.
Yeah, that sounds about right for us. You got to pass the time out somehow, right? But just looking at the overarching of A&M season, I think something that I really liked hearing what Bucky McMillan had to say was, he talks about how Florida, when Todd Golding got there, they didn't make the NCAA tournament in their first season. They just won a national championship last year. Nate Oates comes to Alabama. They didn't make the NCAA tournament, and last year they were in the Final Four. And then even Kevin Sampson, Bucky said, and I quote, he wins everywhere he goes. When he first started out, they weren't making it to the NCAA tournament, but here's Bucky coming in, having to create an entire new roster, 14 players, and they make the NCAA tournament their first year. I mean, that is a pretty impressive feat.
Yeah, it absolutely is. The way I'm in the middle of writing a column, which will be on KBTX.com later, the way I put it on there, it kind of felt like week 0 in the football season. Like week 0, there's some teams that play some meaningful games, but most of the teams in college football have a pass until the season really starts week 1. This season for A&M basketball was kind of like week 0, that there was not very high expectations. Like you mentioned, A&M had to replace 14 players from last year's team. Chris McDermott was the only guy on the roster. When Bucky McMillan was hired, the transfer portal had already been open for a while, and he had to work, kind of scrape what many would think would be the bottom of the barrel on what was left to fill out that roster. I mean, a lot of teams, and they've said this, a lot of teams who had to replace that much do the best they can to put warm bodies on the floor and then kind of see where the chips fall. Bucky McMillan was able to actually put together a NCAA tournament team, and some might roll their eyes and say, okay, hang the banner. A&M's only made the tournament 17 times in their entire program history. Mm-hmm. Making the tournament is not an easy feat. And so to be able to do that, I do think Bucky McMillan and staff do deserve some recognition and some praise for being able to do that and find a way to find guys who just got along from stage one. That's the one thing that the players said when we talked afterwards, is that the thing they'll remember the most about the season is the guys, and that's surprising because when you throw guys together like that last minute, they don't always connect, and these guys connected, and that kind of showed itself out on the floor.
Yeah, I think I liked what Marcus Hill maybe had to say best, and he was, I think out of all of the players that we did speak to afterwards, he was definitely by far the most emotional. Like, you could see it in his eyes. It was very sad to see. I felt really bad, but I'm a softie when it comes to that. But he said, a lot of times you get thrown into rosters like these and it can easily become a click here or a click there. But for A&M, it wasn't that. And I think not at all points during the season, but at a lot of points during the season, you could see that they were together as one. But yeah,
I think that that's just a testament to the coaching staff, and I think the important thing another important thing to kind of shine a light on too, that probably is talked about a little bit but can be talked about again, is the fact that when Bucky McMillan came in as the first time SEC coach, he was, less than a decade ago, he was a high school coach. He comes into the SEC, and what he decides to do is bring a lot of really veteran coaches along as assistants beside him. And not only veteran coaches that just know the SEC, they were veteran coaches that were on an A&M staff that made it to the Sweet 16 and had one of the biggest comebacks in history in this arena in the late 20-teens with Mitch Cole, Kyle Keller, Darby Rich, the strength coach. And so they're guys that not only know the SEC, not only know the NCAA tournament, they know A&M, they know what works in College Station, how to recruit to College Station. Testament, one of the things that stood out to me from what Bucky McMillan said was the fact that you go to these guys to make a recruiting pitch and you're saying, hey, come play Bucky ball at A&M. You're going to run your butt off. And by the way, you really don't know who you're going to play with either.
Right.
So come on down. And some guys took a chance and it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was also a part of kind of his whole long spiel on that note of, them being able to make the NCAA tournament. And he's like, try recruiting like I did.
Yeah.
He literally said that because it is true. I mean, you don't know who you're going to play with, but find out when you get here, to your point. But back to the game for a little bit, I think a lot of talk and conversation leading up to this and throughout the entire year, there's been a lot said about the SEC and the conference itself in college basketball. And it really has made itself a bigger conference.
This is your column. We were talking about this earlier.
This is my column.
This is your column.
This is my column. But I am curious about what you had to say, because we kind of had to be quiet because we were waiting for our turn to go into the locker room. But there's a lot of talk surrounding the SEC as one of the toughest leagues, or the toughest league to play in college basketball. And I do think over the past couple years, the SEC has really stinted their name in a dominant college basketball conference. But then you have the Big 12. And the Big 12 has always been a dominant conference. And I think tonight's game was a testament to that for sure, because Houston was just the better team. But from what you saw, A&M going up against Houston, watching them play all SEC league play and all of that stuff, and now going up against a Big 12 team, do you think that the SEC is the toughest conference in college basketball? Do you think that statement holds water.
Yeah, so there's several pieces to this. I think if you asked that question last season, absolutely yes.
Yes.
I think that was one of the toughest conferences that college basketball has ever seen.
Absolutely.
With the makeup of all the teams, how deep it was, how many teams made the tournament. Like, that was a historic conference season. This year was not the same. The SEC was down. I do think the Big 12 was the better conference of the two this season. But that being said, I think when you look at the top of the Big 12, both Houston and Arizona have real shouts at making a national championship. In the SEC, Florida, yes. The other team that finished second, Vanderbilt, they got bounced by Nebraska tonight. And so I think the top of the Big 12 is even in an echelon above the rest of the conference. So to use this one game as maybe to extrapolate both conferences, I don't think it's quite the best measurement.
That's fair.
But I do think there is something to that. I do think this year you can maybe say the SEC had a little bit top to bottom more physicality. The Big 12 was a little bit more finesse. But that kind of proved that proved itself a little bit. A&M physical team needed that physicality to beat St. Mary's, but Houston's just a national championship caliber team. Yeah, they're just one of the most athletic teams that I've ever seen. And I mean, even if you want to go down to the minutia, their game plan, knowing that they had a little bit of a height advantage and knowing that Rashana G is a really good rebounder, was just get in there, muck it up under the rim, and bat balls back. A&M, their game plan on the defensive boards a lot of times is to crash 4 to 5 guys down. So if 4 to 5 guys are down in the paint trying to get the rebounds and you tip it back out, all of your guards are out there. Well, that creates loose ball scenarios, the ball's going everywhere, and the amount of times that Houston's guards were able to secure some of those passes, and A&M's guards had some trouble sometimes getting their hands on some of those passes and screen. It's just little bits of minutia in athleticism and hand-eye control and everything. It was just a really impressive Houston team.
Right, and that's but to the point of the conferences and all of that stuff, I think it's something that can maybe go interchange year to year. But with the rebounding stuff, I mean, that was something that I don't think I've ever seen a college basketball team to do. I want to say it was the first half, and it was right before Houston started going on that run, and there was probably a solid 2 minutes of the game where it was just all down on Houston's end, and they just kept on rebounding. What you're saying, they kept on tipping it back, and A&M just could not get a hold of the ball, and it was just constantly. Houston wasn't making the buckets, but they were getting the rebounds, and eventually they got the buckets.
Normally, I would say that's another thing that I haven't seen before. But I think because you're a newbie to KBTX, last year's A&M team was number 1 in the country in offensive rebounding, and that was kind of right out of the Buzz Williams last year playbook. Now that is also elite level offensive rebounding and what they were able to do. But yes, A&M could not get a control of the defensive boards. And okay, yes, there was probably, we get a little bit that closer courtside view. So there was a little bit, you could see maybe 1, 2, 3 instances where maybe they could have, a foul could have been called one way or the other. But I don't think that played too much of a role. That they were the more dominant offensive rebounding team. A&M was down there scrapping, but again, I think it just goes back to they were the more talented team.
Absolutely.
But yes, defensive rebounding for Houston, offensive rebounding played an absolutely huge role. I mean, I always pull these up and I never actually look at it. The offensive rebounding stats. Houston 19-9.
Wow.
And Houston scored 18 second chance points to A&M's 8. I mean, it was a 30-point loss, but 18 points in a 30-point loss is significant.
It's a pretty big deal, yeah. And now looking forward, A&M season is over, and something that was asked in the little post-mock scrum interview that we were able to get he had mentioned kind of what they're looking for in baby steps, because the game had literally just ended, of what he needs to do to keep moving this forward and keep buckyball on the rise. What do you think is going to be the most important thing when it comes to recruiting for A&M basketball next year?
I agree with him. He's talking length at positions. They were a pretty undersized team. We talked about it a lot with St. Mary's. They're 203rd, I believe, average height in the country this year. That was going to be, and that was even still with Mackenzie Mbako, who was injured for the majority of the season and didn't play. They want to be able to match up a little bit better, especially at the 3, the 4, and the 5. Be a little bit taller there, so that they can get in their rebound, and because when you can get those defensive rebounds, you're playing on a broken floor. You can get that outlet fast, move quickly like they want to, and get a lot of points on a broken floor, which is a kind of a staple of buckyball. So just getting taller, being able to defend in the post a little bit more with that length, I think that's the number one priority. And then just continuing, as we've seen with when buckyball is effective, they're hitting three-pointers. Stockpiling three-point shooters who can hit consistently is always going to be a priority, I believe, of Bucky McMillan and his staff while they're here. The good news is they have a pretty solid foundation. They're going to lose Rashana G. That's going to be big shoes to fill. That's going to be kind of the priority to get a really solid 5 like that. But again, and we have to, this is not too dissimilar to how Buzz Williams played. For anybody out there who's saying, well, they need to go out there and get a 7-footer, well, no, they don't need to get a 7-footer. That would not work in Bucky's system. No. You need guys who are able to move, who are athletic. And as we've seen with Rashana G, you can have a guy who is quote unquote undersized, but he can match up and out rebound guys who are a lot taller than him and less athletic. That was perfectly shown and demonstrated in the St. Mary's game. So finding a replacement for Rashana G is going to be a big priority. Just getting taller. You're going to lose Rylan Griffin. You're going to lose, I'm going to try to do this off the top of my head, you're going to lose Pop Isaacs, two guys who hit a lot of three-pointers. Getting that three-point threat back in there and going is going to be huge. And then they have to continue to try, and some of this is a little bit of a crapshoot, but continue to find guys that are good team guys that gel together, because for any deficiencies that they might have had in basketball talent, they had good chemistry, and that solved a lot of problems as well.
Yeah, I'm going to be very curious to see maybe who they bring in or who steps up on this roster to not necessarily fill Rashawn's shoes on the floor, but just like you said, his leadership status in that locker room and when they get on the court, because you can see that every single guy on that bench, on the floor, maybe in the locker room, we don't get in there very often, but you can see how much they look up to him. So I'd be very curious to see who's going to take that role and take that place and just have that presence in there. But is there anything else that we haven't touched on?
Well, here's the last thing. This is the double-edged sword of having that 0-week season. Yeah, he gets Bucky McMillan, his staff, this team kind of gets a pass, and really they're playing with house money in this NCAA tournament. They overachieved, and it is absolutely a successful season because of everything they had to overcome. Really and truly, if you want to say the best thing about this season is that McMillan and his staff, as they go to the transfer portal, as they continue recruiting high school and the such, they have a proof of concept. They can show, hey, even with this ragtag group of guys that we threw together, the system works. You can be first place in the SEC. You can get buys in the SEC tournament. You can make the NCAA tournament with this system and not even necessarily have fully Bucky's guys in place. That's the proof of concept. That's going to make recruiting in life a lot easier for Bucky and his staff. The flip side to that is with that comes the critique. So they have to do this right again and again and again. They've set the standard that they can just kind of throw together a roster and make the NCAA tournament. So now they need to make the NCAA tournament again and again and again. And it's going to prove, barring extenuating circumstances like injuries or crazy things like that, the bar has been set. So now the growing period is over, and the expectation is going to be NCAA tournaments, and that's the double-edged sword of making the NCAA tournament with such a crazy circumstances. When you kind of get a pass, is when the passes are gone, they got to make the tournament every year now.
Yeah, no, I could not agree with you more, but they are definitely breaking down this court here, and I have a feeling they probably want us to get out. But you know what? Hey, maybe we will be back next year.
Maybe
we'll run it back.
I mean, or at least every 5 years. It seems A&M is in Oklahoma City, or 10 years. So 10 years, we'll probably be back.
Yeah, so you know what? Maybe we'll be back in 10 years. Maybe we'll be back next year. But for now, from the Paycom Center, for Travis Brown, I'm Erin Patterson, KBTX Sports.
As they're literally tearing the carpet from under our feet.
I know.